Hi, my name is Alan, and I married my nanny. I was raised by a widowed, overprotective father. My mom passed away when I was really young, and that affected my dad deeply. He had lost his wife and felt like he could lose me as well any second. He wouldn't let me go out after school, and he would be wary of any friends I made, worried they would be a bad influence on me. So I grew up in this bubble, where everything was pristine and safe, but incredibly boring and monotonous. I went to school, came back, did my homework, played by myself, and went to bed. The worst part about it all was that my dad wasn't even around most of the time. You see, my father is a very successful shop owner and a bit of a workaholic. He cares deeply about me, I'm not going to deny that, but at the same time, he was rarely in my life at all. He told me that he needed to provide for me, but we had more than enough money to live comfortably without him working so hard. He lost himself in his job most of the time, and I respect his work ethic, but I still needed him around. So to make up for the fact that he was never there to protect me, he hired nannies. I didn't have any uncles, aunts, or grandparents, so it was always only dad and myself after mom died. I barely remember her at all. She got sick when I was 5 and was gone before I turned 6. There are still plenty of pictures of her around the house, so at least I get to know how she looked like. Mom was really pretty, and everyone says I have her eyes, which is nice. Every day when I got home from school, I'd be greeted by a nanny. Dad wasn't there, and I'd have some milk and cookies and then do my homework. Sometimes the nannies would keep me company and play games with me. Other times they would just look at me from another side of the room and read a magazine or something while they kept an eye on me. It depended on the nanny, and there were some I liked more than others. They kept changing since my dad didn't trust anyone for too long. As you might have guessed, Dad was a bit paranoid when it came to my care. He was certain something was going to happen to me at any given moment. He wouldn't let me cross the street alone until I was well into puberty, and would never let me go outside and play on my own. Going to sleepovers or parties was a big no-no, even if other adults were around. So you can imagine I had a really hard time making friends at all. I felt so isolated all the time. I would beg my dad to allow me to bring schoolmates over, but he rarely said yes. I could only do it if he was around, and he worked so hard that it rarely happened at all. He'd get home to have dinner with me, but by that time, I couldn't exactly invite a friend over. It was too late in the evening already. When I entered puberty, my dad took a greater responsibility at his job, as he opened several stores around the country. That meant he had to fly often to other states and leave me alone for several days at a time. That was when the nannies began spending a whole lot more time at our home, sleeping over often. Most of them were older, around my dad's age, and they were usually very strict and distant. He seemed to pick those kinds of nannies so they wouldn't be too permissive and allow me to get away with stuff he had forbidden me from doing. When I turned 15, I sat down with my dad to have a real heart-to-heart with him. I told him I felt I was old enough to take care of myself when he wasn't around, and that it was weird for me to keep having nannies. I asked him to let me go out with friends once in a while. He refused, which really frustrated me, but agreed that I didn't need professional nannies any longer. He could agree to hire someone a bit more relaxed, as long as I agreed to follow his rules. It was not what I had hoped for, but it was something, so I agreed. That was when I met Lisa, the love of my life. Lisa was 21 when my dad hired her. She was a college student and the daughter of one of his employees. She was incredibly pretty and had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. I had just turned 16 a week ago and couldn't believe I still was forced to have a nanny, but having her around made it better. We got along really well, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel so alone. I would actually look forward to getting back from school. Before, I had to be all on my own, without friends and with a strict old woman who'd barely talk to me at all but keep a watchful eye on me. Now, I got to talk and laugh with the prettiest girl I had ever seen. I think it really was love at first sight. I could barely stop smiling whenever she was around. I still remember our first kiss vividly. We were sitting on the couch, laughing about some random joke, and she leaned in closer to me. I couldn't help myself and kissed her. I really expected her to get angry and scold me, but instead, Lisa kissed me back. It was incredible. I hugged her tightly and we began making out. My dad wouldn't arrive until much later, so we knew there was no risk of getting caught. Lisa was the most incredible woman I've ever met. She was studying to be a nurse, and she was incredibly smart and kind-hearted. I know it was wrong for her to have a relationship with me when I was young, and she was in charge of taking care of me. But she didn't do it to mess with me or my dad. We really did fall in love. The truth of the matter was, though, that it didn't matter if we were in love or not. I was still young, and my dad didn't even want me dating girls my age. If he found out we were involved, he would have flipped out. We knew my dad was more than capable of calling the cops and getting Lisa in a whole lot of trouble. That night, when I went to bed, all I could think about was how soft her lips were, how perfect she was. But the following morning, reality set. No matter how much I loved her, I knew we were doing something wrong. So at first, we tried not to kiss again. We had this long conversation, and I have to admit that I cried a bit because I really liked her. But it made sense. It was better if we remained good friends. For a while, we managed to be just that. She was my nanny. She'd help me with my homework. We'd talk for hours and hours, or just chill out and watch a fun movie. It was so perfect. I had a friend in my life and I could actually hang out with her without my father freaking out. He trusted her even when he didn't let me go out with any people my age. But after a while, it became impossible to ignore our feelings for one another, and we began dating behind my dad's back. We'd cuddle together when my dad wasn't in town, have romantic dinners, and even go out to the movies. Dad would have killed us if he discovered we left the house unsupervised, but he was completely blind to what was happening. Lisa and I dated for over a year when we decided that this was really serious. We weren't going to just split when she stopped being my nanny. We wanted to be together forever. So when I was 17, I proposed to her, and she said yes. We knew we couldn't get married or even tell anyone about our relationship until I turned 18, but we were willing to wait. She was definitely worth it. The months slipped by slowly, too slowly. I couldn't wait for my birthday to arrive, and to finally be able to leave for college and tell the world about my love for Lisa. I would be free to live my life as well, away from my father's overprotectiveness. I was more than ready to leave my house, to live on campus, to go out to parties and live like a normal young man should, instead of always being locked up inside. The first problem came when I was accepted into college. Dad wanted me to go to a closer university, so I could stay home while I studied. I refused, explaining I wanted to go to my college of choice. He told me that he wouldn't pay for it if that was the case. I completely freaked out. I finally stood up to him and told my dad he couldn't continue to protect me this way all my life. The following months were complicated. We'd argue most of the time we were together. Lisa was my rock, a real support through that hell. Finally, though, the moment arrived. I turned 18 and finished high school. Lisa and I decided it was time to let my dad know about our relationship. You can't even imagine how much my father freaked out. He called Lisa all kinds of names and forbade me from ever seeing her again. I told him I was an adult now and he couldn't tell me who to date, not any longer. My dad then used the last tool he had to manipulate me. He told me he'd take me out of his will and he wouldn't pay a cent of my college education or help me financially at all. Dad told me he loved me, but he knew what was best and that I had to listen to him. I refused to live under his thumb any longer and left my home that very night. I moved in with Lisa and soon after got a job. Dad refused to help me out at all and told me I could return home whenever I was ready to apologize and dump my girlfriend. Lisa and I got married soon after, and my dad didn't come to the wedding. She was 4 months pregnant when we tied the knot, and when my father found out about it, he completely lost his mind. But since I was an adult, there was nothing he could do about it. Dad hasn't met his grandchild yet, and only ever calls me to ask if I'm ready to come to my senses. He claims the only way he'll ever be in my life again is if I get a divorce. He's even willing to take in his grandson, but not until I abandon Lisa. Of course, that is never going to happen. I have a beautiful family, and my in-laws are amazing. I got a scholarship thanks to my great grades, and I plan on being a good provider for Lisa and our baby. I know the way we began our relationship wasn't right, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Thanks for watching. Did you ever get into a big argument with your parents? Leave a comment and tell us about it. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other videos on the channel.
Hi, my name is Mary, and my brother James ruined the most important day of my life. I'm still furious, and this happened months ago. I'm finally ready to talk about it, and I'd like everyone to know how much of a horrible person he truly is. Growing up with James was an absolute nightmare. I know you must be thinking I'm just blowing this out of proportion, but just hear me out. This isn't normal, annoying brother stuff. He was awful towards me. He always said nasty stuff, broke all my toys, and would throw terrible temper tantrums. He was irritating and mean, and everything had to be about him. It was as if James wasn't happy unless he was the center of attention every single day. He hated my parents being proud of me, and so whenever I did something good, he'd act up all the worse, just to get them to focus on him again. He didn't care if the attention he received was good or bad, as long as he was in the spotlight. It was incredibly frustrating, but I figured my brother had problems, and I tried to help him. He only took advantage of my kindness and would mess with me every single time. I thought I was forced to love my brother, and so I kept giving him new chances, but he always would end up disappointing me. It took me the longest time to realize he simply wasn't worth my time at all. I cried so many times over the horrible things he did until I gave up trying. It hurt, but I knew it was for the better. My dad kept telling me that it was just a phase and that he'd outgrow it eventually. I used to think that at first too, but now I don't believe it any longer. He's a horrible person and he'll never, ever change. Living with him was a complete nightmare, and I tried never ever to bring any friends home. I knew he'd find a way of making their lives a living hell during the time they were under the same roof as he was. At school, he spent most of his time suspended, and he would fail most of his classes. He always tried to cheat off me, and I tried to stop him because I didn't want to be punished for what he did. James was a messed up kid, and everyone at my school thought he was a freak. Honestly, since he was my brother, I tried to keep others from bullying him at first. Whenever I did, though, he'd end up getting me in some kind of embarrassing and weird problem, and so I completely gave up after a while. You can't even imagine how relieved I was when I finally decided to leave home for college. It meant being far away from my horrible brother. It was as if I could enjoy my own room for the first time in my life without worrying if someone had put something nasty in my bed or pulled a cruel prank on me. I was really happy, and honestly, I didn't miss him at all. I did call my mom and dad often, but I never asked to speak to James. Fortunately, he didn't want to speak to me either, apparently, and so we just seemed to ignore each other. In my first year of college, I ended up meeting a great guy named Tom. He was amazing and the complete opposite of my brother James. He was caring, loving, and never did anything to hurt me. I was amazed that a guy that great could really fall in love with me, and he showed me that I was worthy of real love. My brother's cruelty had messed up my self-confidence, but Tom helped me change that. I got a great job after graduating from college and ended up moving with Tom. We were so happy together. I worked as a computer programmer at the same place he did, and we seemed to have the perfect life. My parents met Tom a few times, and they adored him. He also knew many of my friends and other relatives, but not my brother. He wanted to meet him to see if maybe my brother had changed. I think Tom noticed I was still sad about everything that had happened between us. I mean, even if he was so cruel, James was still my brother, right? Eventually, Tom asked me to marry him, and of course, I said yes. He was the love of my life, and I couldn't wait to be his wife. And so the planning began. It was a lot of work, and Mom helped me out a lot. I had to pick up the venue, my dress, the decorations, everything. and that included the guest list. That was when things got tricky. I had to figure out who I was going to invite. Of course, my whole family would be there, as well as Tom's, many of our closest friends as well. We invited our boss to be polite, but knew he wouldn't show up. Some of our coworkers were also invited, and they were so excited for us. They said we were the cutest couple ever. The big question on my mind was, should I invite James? Tom told me it was up to me, and Mom told me she'd respect whatever I decided to do. It was hard to make up my mind, honestly, and I ended up deciding it was better if he didn't come at all. I knew it would be trouble if I invited him because he'd end up doing something cruel. The real problem was, I felt awfully guilty about it. Even after everything he had done to me in the past, he was still my brother, and siblings are supposed to love each other, right? It was going to be the most special night of my life, and my brother wasn't going to be there. My mom seemed upset as well, and that hurt me. Mom was great, and she always wanted James to become a better person. I wondered if I was doing my family more harm than good by refusing to invite James. As the date grew closer, my brother somehow discovered I was getting married. Mom and Dad didn't tell him about it, but maybe one of my other relatives did. The thing is, James called me and asked me if he was invited. I was surprised by his question and took it as a good sign. Maybe he was getting better after all and actually wanted to make up for all the stuff he did over the years. Maybe he had outgrown his cruel behavior. I asked him if he wanted to come, and he said he'd love to. He sounded so sincere. I told him I'd think about it and call him back. He wasn't invited, and it probably would be easier just to keep him from going to the party, but I began feeling really bad about it. It would be too cruel not to let him come, and so I called him back and officially invited him to my wedding. James sounded surprisingly happy, and this worried me. Could he be planning to do something bad, or maybe he had really changed? The day finally arrived. James had seemed a bit upset at first about me not inviting him from the get-go, but he seemed to be over it by the time of the party. Everything was perfect. My wedding gown was beautiful. My hair was lovely. Tom looked so handsome. Mom was crying tears of happiness, and the venue was gorgeous. Nothing was going wrong, and I was incredibly happy. Even James seemed to be having a good time. It was amazing. I was so relieved and started thinking that maybe he could become a part of my life and be an uncle to my future kids with Tom. He met my husband and was really pleasant. But soon I'd realize it was all an act. Right after saying our vows, people started screaming. I didn't understand what was happening, but then I saw it. My brother had knocked down the table the cake was on. Everyone saw him doing it and were screaming at him, but James simply ran away. I was so upset. How could he be so cruel and conceited? Everything had to be about him, even if that meant ruining his sister's big day. My mom hugged me really tight as the caterers tried to fix the problem. She told me she was sorry about what my brother had done. I was so upset. I told her I should have never invited him, and she agreed. At least my parents had my back. I thought that was the end of it and accepted the fact that my wedding cake was ruined. I wouldn't let my brother ruin the rest of the wedding, though, and so we carried on as if nothing had happened. Little did I know that this was only the beginning, and it was about to get worse. Far, far worse. What happened next made me realize that James had planned this all along. It hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment thing. A few minutes later, my brother came back, but no one saw him. Why? Well, he had a plan in motion, and he made sure no one saw a thing. He turned off all the lights in the venue, and the next thing we knew, a bunch of nasty animals flooded the place. There were rats, snakes, frogs, and all kinds of creepy crawlers. Everyone was freaking out and opening the doors and windows to escape. That was when a horrible stench filled the place. James had actually released a fart gas into the ventilation system and made the whole room smell horrible. The whole night was ruined, and all the money we spent was lost. A few of the guests actually had to go to the hospital because they had mild panic attacks. James knew full well that our Aunt Laura is scared to death of snakes, and she freaked out when they began crawling all around the floor. Everyone had to leave, and the night was an absolute disaster. I was mortified and spent weeks apologizing to everyone I knew for my brother's actions. Everyone was so understanding and told me it wasn't my fault. I should have known better and refused to invite him just as I had decided at first. My brother will never, ever change, and everyone in my family is furious at him. Mom and Dad refuse to speak to him, and I don't ever want to hear about him again. He planned this whole messed up thing way ahead of time, and I can't even understand why. I'm still incredibly upset, but at least my honeymoon was perfect. Nothing went wrong because my brother wasn't around. Tom promised we'd celebrate again when we have our first anniversary and throw a beautiful wedding party, this time without James there. I hope my brother doesn't try to show up and mess that up as well. Thanks for watching. What's the meanest thing someone you are related to ever did? Let us know in the comments. Please don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos on the channel.
I know that it's probably every girl's dream to find true love and get married to a charming, handsome man. We all have some sort of idea of what we want our weddings to be like, but we think of other things too, right? Surely there was more to a girl's life than aspiring to get married. Wrong. Bouquets, corsages, bridesmaids, cake, garlands. All I could think about was my wedding day. I was obsessed. So obsessed that at the age of 7, I already had a wedding scrapbook. In it, I stuck pictures of wedding dresses, floral arrangements, and countless outfit ideas for bridesmaids, maids of honor, and flower girls. I had an entire 10 pages just for wedding cakes. As I got older, my dream continued to grow. I still had my scrapbook, but I started using Pinterest instead. I spent hours on there. I collected more wedding ideas and made virtual friends who were also obsessed with weddings. They were much older than me because I was still only 16. 16 was an exciting age because it meant that soon I could be legally married. But first, I had to find someone suitable enough to be my husband. I dated several guys in high school, but nothing ever worked out. My biggest heartbreak was with Harvey. We had been going steady for 7 months. He had most of the qualities I was looking for. He was smart, good looking, and his parents were rich. Most importantly, he looked great in a tux. But one day, I was using his laptop to browse some more floral arrangements when I discovered that he was cheating on me. Some girl named Hannah was sending him messages complimenting him on what a great kisser he was and how she looked forward to more dates with him in the future. How could he do this to me? I'd lost my husband. So the next few months were quite depressing for me. I tried talking to friends, but that didn't help. I tried reading books on how to get over an ex-boyfriend, but that didn't help either. One afternoon, I tried window shopping at a bridal store to cheer myself up. I didn't realize that this would add to my heartbreak. I started crying, and as I tried to leave the store, I bumped into the most sinister-looking woman I had ever seen. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she grinned. Nothing, I'm okay," I replied. "Oh, Daisy, I can tell that something is wrong. Anyway, that boy didn't deserve you. Cheating on you like that? What a douchebag. Would you like to join me for a cup of tea next door?" she said. How did she know my name? I was surprised that she knew about my situation and a bit intrigued by her whole demeanor. I figured I had nothing left to lose, so I followed her next door to the little tea shop. I had never noticed it before. We sat down and the waiter immediately served us. Somehow he knew exactly what I wanted. "What's going on? How did he?" I gasped. "Well, dear, some of us are just extraordinary." She winked at me. What? I went completely blank. "What would you say if I could introduce you to a group of people who would make all your dreams come true? I know that you're sad now, but this change could really turn your life around for the better," she said. "A group of people? What are you all? Witches?" I asked. She started laughing so much she nearly spilled her drink. "Of course not, dear. We are just extraordinary people who are able to see and do more than, ordinary ones. You could have a really bright future with us. We will ensure that you always have enough money and that you will never endure any hardship in life. You just have to be completely devoted to us and we will take care of the rest. You'll have enough money to do whatever you please and you will always be comfortable in life," she explained. "This sounds like a cult," I said. Don't call it that. Let's just use the word organization instead. Think about it. Come back tomorrow after you've made up your mind, and I'll introduce you to our leader, she said. I finished my drink and left. That night, I thought really hard. I had really sort of given up on finding true love. So if I could have everything else, then why should I hesitate? I guessed I could always leave if I wasn't happy, or if I wasn't too freaked out by everything. I showed up at the tea shop the next day, and the strange woman was already waiting for me. She sat at a larger table with two men who looked just as strange. Hi, Daisy. We've been waiting for you, one of them said. Hi, I replied. Have you made your decision? The woman asked. Yes, I'm in, I said, so excitedly I surprised myself. Great. My name is Esme, by the way. This is Robert, our leader, she said while pointing to the man who had been silent. I'm very pleased to hear about your interest in our organization. Before you can become a full member, you must be initiated. Please follow me, he said. He led us to a door which led to a huge empty room. There was a stage on one end. This is where we have meetings and perform rituals, he said. My eyes nearly dropped out of my head. Did he just say rituals? What had I gotten myself into? Don't worry. We won't make you do anything too intense in the beginning, he said. He explained certain details that I can't reveal in this video, and then I signed a contract which sort of said that they owned me from then on. I would have to do everything they said, but I'd always have everything I wanted and more, so I was okay with that. I attended all meetings and rituals until I became a well-known member of the group. I was still balancing this life with school and home. Nobody knew I was a part of this group, not even my best friend. When I left to go to meetings, my parents just thought I was going to dance practice or hang out with my friends. I felt very happy to be part of a group where I belonged, even if we were engaged in some really strange activities. It was the best part of my life until my final year of high school, the year I met Richard. Richard moved to our school from a nearby school because he was expelled. He never told me why, but I tried to just see him for who he was. I couldn't imagine him doing anything bad at all, ever. He was well-mannered and polite. In fact, he was the perfect gentleman. We met when my Spanish teacher asked him to sit next to me. I felt so comfortable talking to him that we exchanged numbers and spoke more frequently until we were inseparable. We did almost everything together. We studied, watched movies, read the same books, and hung out almost every weekend. As we grew closer and closer, I began to remember the dream I always had to get married to the perfect man and have a perfect wedding. Although we were closer than ever, I could never tell him about my secret life in the cult. I didn't want to imagine what he'd think about me after that, so I always kept it hidden. This went on for 2 years after we left high school. We were both working to save money for college, and although we still lived with our parents, we were trying to figure out how we could eventually live together. One afternoon, as we went strolling hand in hand through the park, Richard said, "Hey, we've been working very hard. Why don't we go on a mini vacation?" "Where could we go? We don't have much money," I said. "Don't worry, I've got a plan. Just pack a bag," he replied while smiling. The next weekend, he blindfolded me and I got into his car. After a few hours of driving, he finally said, "We're here." When I took off the blindfold, I was in front of the most luxurious hotel I had ever seen in my life. "You're kidding, right? We can't afford this," I said. "Come with me," he smiled. He took me up to our room, which was lit by candlelight and filled with the scent of roses. "It's so beautiful here. It's like we're on our honeymoon," I squealed with joy. "Our honeymoon will be even better," he smirked. Suddenly, he got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. Yes, I will marry you," I said while jumping into his arms. We had the most amazing weekend ever. When we got back to our town, I decided that it was time to start planning my wedding. I was finally going to achieve my biggest dream ever. I took out all my scrapbooks and began reviewing my old ideas. I had about 20 color schemes planned and 10 potential venues. I began to imagine my life after the wedding too. Our honeymoon would be perfect. We'd have a lovely house and a perfect little family. While I was filled with thoughts of my future with Richard, my phone rang. It was Esme. I sighed and snapped back to reality. "I didn't see you this weekend. What's going on?" she said. "I had to leave town for a while," I replied. "I need you to come to the meeting room this afternoon," she said, and then hung up. I sat down filled with dread. I was so caught up in my bliss that I had completely forgotten that I was part of this organization. Now that Richard had asked me to marry him, I was finally going to have what I had always wanted. I didn't need to be part of their group any longer. Also, Richard would never approve. What would I tell him? What would I tell our children? I had to find a way to get out, but I didn't know how. I went to the meeting a few minutes early, and Esme was already waiting. I explained to her that my boyfriend proposed and that I might not be able to continue my life with them. She stared at me for a while and then said, "Part of our agreement is that you're not allowed to leave, ever. If you do, we will have to harm you. You're already too deep. You know too many of our secrets. After the meeting, I went home and decided to simply continue like I always had, hiding my secret from Richard and everyone else who knew me. Fast forward to my wedding day. Everything was going just as planned. We had decided on an outdoor wedding with a beautiful garden. I looked gorgeous in my wedding dress and my bridal party was just as fabulous. As my father walked me down the aisle, I nearly cried because it was all happening exactly how I had always imagined it as a child. I stared at Richard, who was even more handsome than he usually was. I wanted to kiss and embrace him right there, even before we said our vows. The ceremony was ideal until the priest asked, "Does anyone object to this union?" I heard a loud voice from the crowd. "We do." I turned my head and realized that 10 of my cult members were standing up. They were all dressed in black. Esme walked up to the podium and took the microphone. "Daisy belongs to us, and we do not approve of this marriage. We have already decided who her husband will be, and it is not Richard," she said. "How could you do this to me? Please don't. I love him," I pleaded. Richard's eyes filled with tears. "How could you keep something like this from me? I trusted you," he said. I felt horrible. Suddenly, 5 cops came running down the aisle. They grabbed Richard. "You're under the arrest for an involvement in the recent bank robbery and under investigation for a string of robberies which happened in the last few months," one of the officers said. It all made sense. That was how he got all that money. "Richard?" I screamed. Although he lied to me and he was probably a thief, he was still the love of my life. My heart ached. Esme looked at me emotionlessly. "Come on, let's go." I had no choice but to follow, while leaving all our guests in awe. I guess this is a wedding they'll never forget. Hi, I'm Daisy, and you might remember the story about how my dream wedding was ruined by my dark secret. This is what happened next. After Esme and the other cult members ruined my wedding, they drove me several miles away to a small isolated house. It was surrounded by trees and there were no other people in sight. There, I was confined to a dark bedroom. I was told that I was on punishment for trying to get married to someone who is not part of the cult. The small room had only one tiny window, which I would often look through while feeling extreme sadness that I had ruined my life. Why were the birds allowed to fly around happily while I was drowning in sorrow? I should never have joined this cult. If I hadn't, I'd be on my honeymoon with Richard. If he hadn't been arrested, that is. It was all too complicated. I'd spend most of my days crying. My phone and other electronic devices were taken away, so I was not even able to contact my friends or family. I wasn't even allowed to read books. I was given food 3 times a day, but it was usually stale or tasteless. But before I continue, like and subscribe to this channel or you will never eat delicious food again. After what seemed like months, I was finally told that I could leave, but I would have to make my own way back. I followed the path until I reached the main road. From there, it was easy to walk back to my town. When I arrived, I was relieved but extremely tired. First, I went home. I knocked on the door and my mom opened it. "Daisy, what are you doing here?" she asked coldly. "Mom, they took me away and punished me. I was just allowed to leave. Please let me in," I said. "I'm sorry, but we can't have anything to do with you anymore. You lied to us for too long and quite frankly, I don't trust you anymore," she said while slamming the door in my face. I couldn't believe it. My own mother refused to accept me. She hadn't seen me for months and she didn't even seem to miss me, not one little bit. I walked to my best friend Stephanie's house, thinking that maybe she would take me in. I rang the doorbell and she opened the door. Daisy?" she said. "Stephanie, I'm so relieved to see you. After the wedding they took me away and," I said. She didn't even let me finish. "Listen, I don't know who these people are. I don't even know who you are anymore. But what I do know for certain is that I don't want to have anything to do with any of it," she said. "Please, I have nowhere to stay. Would you please just let me stay here?" I pleaded. "No, it's too risky," she said, and she closed the door. None of my other friends or family accepted me. I felt like nobody cared about me and that I was all alone. I didn't know where to go. My last resort was to find Esme and ask her if she would take me in. She was at the tea shop, as usual. I walked in and explained my situation. She smirked. "Well, actually, I knew you'd come here today. It's a special day because we plan to introduce you to the man you'll be marrying soon. His name is Benjamin. You can stay at his house tonight," she said. "I can stay? Where? With who? I replied in utter shock and disbelief. Don't think about it too much. You agreed to this when you decided to join our little family. Didn't you read the fine print? Come on, let's go, she said as she got up. I had no choice but to follow her to her car. She drove for a few minutes until we turned up at my future husband's house. It was a really big house, and I imagined that he was probably very wealthy. We walked to the door, and it opened instantly. Welcome. We've been expecting you. I'm Pamela, a sour-faced, middle-aged woman said while rolling her eyes. I assumed she was a maid or a servant, but it was quickly revealed to me that I was to be Benjamin's third wife. Nobody had explained to me in the past that polygamy was a completely acceptable practice in this cult. When I was finally introduced to Benjamin, I felt like digging a hole and burying myself. He was the ugliest man I'd ever seen in my life, and he had to be over 60 years old. I can't wait for us to get married. What's your name again? I can't wait to wake up to your beautiful face every morning, he said while taking my hand and caressing it. Yes, but until then you'll be sleeping over here, said the second wife. Her name was Matilda, and she was just as horrible as Pamela. She directed me to my bedroom, which wasn't too bad. Each wife has her own bedroom. Benjamin decides where he sleeps every night. It depends on his mood, but since you'll be the new one, I guess you'll get lots of attention at the beginning. You still have to listen to me and do as I say. You're my subordinate. Tomorrow, I expect you to be awake at 5, and you should have breakfast ready for everyone. If you make any mistakes, I have permission to punish you. And trust me, I will. She snapped, and then she left me alone in my new room. Who did she think she was? It seemed like life just kept getting worse and worse. I was miserable in that house, and I tried to occupy my mind with positive thoughts. I found out the name of the prison where they had taken Richard, and I began sending him letters. The first one went, Dear love of my life, I'm sorry that life is not going as we planned. I hid something serious from you, and so did you. Although we kept secrets from each other, I hope that someday we will be able to talk and put our differences behind us. I promise to never be dishonest with you about anything ever again, and I'm hoping that you'll do the same for me. The truth is that I've never loved anyone like I've loved you, and I'd do anything for us to be back together again. Please write back. I miss and love you. I'd send a letter almost every week, but months passed and I never got a reply. I was about to give up hope when 1 week before my wedding to Benjamin, I received a letter from Richard asking me to come visit him at the prison because he had something important to discuss with me. I managed to sneak out of the house without Benjamin or his 2 wives noticing. When I saw Richard, it was like I fell in love all over again, despite his unkempt state in his prison uniform. Daisy, I'm so glad to see you, he said. Really? Why did you take so long to answer me then? I asked. I'm sorry about that. All of my letters were confiscated for bad behavior, and they only recently gave them to me. I read all your letters, Daisy. Every single one, he replied. I explained my predicament, that very soon I'd have to marry a horrible man and become his third wife, that I needed an escape, but I had absolutely no idea what to do. Don't worry, my love. I'll find a way, he said, and then winked at me. Then our time was up, so I had to leave. As time continued, I felt more and more nervous. My new wedding was going to happen very soon. Everything had been planned. I had been fitted for my new dress, which I absolutely hated. The 2 awful wives, Pamela and Matilda, were going to be the bridesmaids. I had no friends to invite, and my family had completely deserted me. I felt like I was preparing for my funeral, not my wedding. This marriage would certainly be the death of all my dreams and happiness. When the day finally arrived, I was escorted to the cult's meeting room where the wedding was going to take place. I was all dressed for the ceremony. Just as I began to cry because I thought that all hope was lost, I heard a loud crash and then saw a man on a motorcycle flying through the window. There was shattered glass everywhere and everyone looked terrified. Hop on, Daisy, the man said while lifting his helmet. It was Richard. I couldn't believe it. I got onto the back of the motorcycle and he sped away. I had been rescued. The joy I felt was unimaginable. I didn't even know that he could ride a bike. He drove for hours, only stopping once or twice to refill the tank. When we reached another state, we stopped for a final time and went to a motel. We pretended to be an ordinary couple on a random road trip, although everyone looked at me like I was crazy because I was still wearing my wedding dress. We were quickly given some keys, and we went to our room so we could finally talk. Richard, how did you pull this off? And at the perfect moment, too. How did you even get out of prison? I asked. I had some help from my friends, the same ones I committed those robberies with who were never found or arrested. They owed me for not snitching on them. I'm sorry I never told you about my double life. The truth is that I just wanted to have enough money to take care of us. If you're uncomfortable with me living that type of lifestyle, I'll stop. I'll get an ordinary job like everyone else, he said. I forgive you because I hid a lot from you too. The truth is that I joined the cult at a point in my life when I felt hopeless. And then I met you. I don't want anything to do with any of them ever again. They just want to destroy my life. We need to run far away, though. Neither of us can risk getting caught, I said. I already have a plan, he smiled. The next day, we worked on changing our appearances. Richard dyed his hair, and I shaved mine off so I'd look like a guy. We also changed our names and got fake ID cards and passports. I couldn't believe how easy it all was. A few days later, when everything was organized, we got dressed and started step 1 of our mission. We needed to leave the country. We got back onto the motorcycle and just kept going until we crossed the border. There we showed them our fake IDs, and they believed everything. We then journeyed to a remote village in the Amazon. Richard explained to me that life would be very different there, as we would not have most of the luxuries we were accustomed to. For one, there'd be no electricity or running water, but we would be fine because we had each other. When we arrived, the villagers were quite welcoming. The children were the most adorable. They all greeted us with hugs. We were given a simple hut, and it was mentioned to us that we should make ourselves comfortable. We couldn't speak to them because we didn't understand their language. How did they know we were coming anyway? How did you pull all of this off? This is the middle of nowhere, I said to Richard. I have my ways, darling, he smirked. We settled nicely into our new life. Richard learned how to hunt, and I learned the trade of the women in the village. I learned how to cook without a stove and how to take a bath in a river. After a few months of adjusting to this peaceful lifestyle, Richard had the cutest idea ever. Hey, Daisy, he said, why don't we try have another wedding ceremony? I quickly agreed. We had a simple wedding near the river. The villagers sang, danced, and celebrated with us. I realized then that marriage was more about the love that you felt for a person, and it had nothing to do with all the hype and glamour. It's about your connection to the love of your life, and should never be a simple performance for the entertainment of other people. After a long, boring car ride, I had finished unpacking my stuff at the beach house and headed downstairs. The beach house was very cozy, decorated with seashells and maritime-themed pictures. Pictures of my family hung all over the walls. Pictures of me with my mom and my sister, picture of us individually, and pictures of my stepdad. There were no pictures of my stepdad and I, because Arthur and I never got along. My sister had dozens of pictures with him. They were as thick as thieves. There was one specific picture that I hated. It was my mom, my stepdad, and my sister Alice. They smiled brightly at the camera and looked like a very happy family. I hated it, because it showed that I wasn't an important part of our family. I went into the kitchen where my mom was sitting, sifting through some flyers, and my sister was painting. I instantly cringed at the horrible smell of the paint thinner my sister was using. The smell was overpowering. Mom, I'm going out to the town. I'll be back later, I said. I grabbed my keys off the counter, but my mom snatched them out of my hand. She motioned at my clothes and said, You're not going out dressed like this and smelling stronger than a skunk. She always did this, so I just rolled my eyes. We got into an argument right there in the kitchen, while my sister painted and my stepdad snuck around behind us. She counted the amount of things she didn't like on her fingers. My perfume, my shorts, the way I had my hair up, and my makeup. You mind me wearing perfume, but you don't care about the stench of my sister's paint thinner, I yelled. I was done with the fight, so I grabbed the keys from her again and ran out the door. On the porch, I debated whether I should leave or not. I didn't want to make my mom angrier, but I also didn't want to give her the satisfaction of keeping me from having fun. I sat on the steps of the porch for about 5 minutes. Then the door opened. Arthur and Alice came outside. Arthur went straight to the car, but Alice turned to me and asked if I wanted to go to the town with them. I did want to go, so I grabbed my bag and headed towards the car. Wait, where's Mom? Alice asked me. I had just heard the squeaky back door shut, so I told her Mom must have gone down to the beach for a walk. Alice said she needed to spit out her chewing gum, so she ran inside real quick and came out running even faster. The ride to town was nauseating, with Alice and our stepdad acting like best friends. Alice had turned her seat at the front and put her legs on Arthur's lap as they sang along to their favorite songs. I sat in the back with earbuds in, trying to ignore them by looking out the window. When we arrived in town, we realized it was full of people and cars because there was a festival. The town square was full of rides and booths with games and food. We spent around 2 hours checking out every booth and trying to win the best prizes. Arthur thankfully stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of his. Both of us just wanted to spend time with my sister. After having won the cutest little stuffed animal, I checked my phone. I had a voicemail from my mom, which was odd because she usually left 3 voicemails and 20 texts if I didn't pick up the first time she called. I listened to it. She apologized for the fight and said she was too tired for a walk and would take a nap instead. "What are you listening to?" Alice asked me. "Nothing. Mom just sent me a voicemail saying she was too tired for a walk and wanted to nap instead," I replied. Alice's face drained in color and her mouth stood agape. She whispered something in Arthur's ear when she thought I wasn't looking, and his face also fell and became like hers. Alice looked like she was deep in thought, and her eyes got teary for some reason. She noticed I was looking at her and said, "I think all the food is making me sick. We should go back home." While walking back to the car, Arthur tried putting his hand on Alice's lower back to comfort her. She moved away. While approaching the house, I heard Alice and Arthur arguing over my music, but I wasn't able to understand what they were saying. I sat forward, toward them, and then a loud cloud of black ash appeared in front of our car. Arthur accelerated, and we pulled into our street. My eyes widened when I saw the fire. Our beach house, along with all those happy memories, was enveloped in flames. Firefighters were trying to put the fire out, but they weren't succeeding. I remembered my mom. I ran frantically around the trucks and police cars, trying to find her. But then I looked at the house. She wanted to take a nap, so she was probably in there. I let out piercing screams as I struggled against the paramedic who was keeping me from running into the open flames. Then I was escorted towards the ambulance, where they had me sit down and drink water. But I could still feel the heat that was radiating from the house onto my face. The first time I left my room again was a week after my mother's death. A week after we returned to our city. Alice had been leaving trays of food on my bedside table, but I felt bad having her do this, knowing she was grieving just as much as I was. So I figured it was time to try and get back to normal slowly. As I walked down the hall of our apartment and towards the kitchen, I had to stop every 2 steps, because the pictures of my mom on the walls felt like a stab in my heart. I walked into the kitchen, and to my surprise, I found my sister giggling on the counter as Arthur fed her pieces of a very large cookie with some writing on it. Alice saw me come in, and immediately hopped off the counter and gave me a tight hug. "What's going on? How come you're so happy?" I asked her. She fidgeted with her fingers and then turned around to Arthur, who looked at me with a blank expression. I looked at the cookie they were eating, and although half the words were gone, I could tell what it was meant to say. "We're getting married!" Alice exclaimed, tearing up with joy. She then walked back to Arthur and jumped on him with a hug. "What the hell, Alice? He's our stepdad!" I yelled at my sister. "Not only that, but he's a pig. He's so gross!" "Hey!" he shouted at me. My sister began to explain to me that they had developed feelings for each other since the beginning, and that they started liking each other at that dinner we had years ago when our mom introduced us to him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt nauseous, and I felt like crying about my mom again. "This is disgusting. He's just taking advantage of your grief," I shouted at Alice. I felt like she was betraying the memory of my mother. I took their cookie from the counter and I smashed it on the ground. Then, I tackled my sister and sat on her stomach, restricting her. I shook her shoulders, trying to get some sense into her. She kicked and screamed, but so did I. I felt a pull from behind as Arthur yanked my hoodie and slammed me on the floor. "Get the hell off your sister," he barked at me as he pinned my arms at my sides. But I managed to kick him in the stomach. As he recoiled in pain, I slid away from him and ran back to my room. I quickly packed all my essentials in a backpack and then waited at my door until I couldn't hear my sister and Arthur. It was nighttime when I could tell they had gone to bed, so I slid out of my room and walked out of the house, but not before grabbing some food from the pantry and a picture of my mom. After a few days, I was settled into a small motel room. I would have preferred literally anything else, but it was all I could afford. I was working night shifts at a diner nearby to afford food. I was so lonely. I just wanted my mom back. One day, I was sleeping when the shrill ringing of a phone woke me up. It was my sister. "Andrea, are you there?" she asked. "Yes, now what do you want?" I asked back coldly. I could hear her voice trembling. She told me she was marrying Arthur in 2 weeks, which felt like a stab in the back. My mom had died not even 6 months ago, and my sister was marrying our stepdad? It was messed up up in so many ways. I hung up the phone when she invited me, but not before I got the address and time the reception started. I wasn't going to the ceremony. The thought of it made me nauseous, but the reception, I might drop by. I started taking more shifts at the diner because I couldn't show up to my sister's wedding in sweatpants, could I? I found the perfect dress at a small boutique. It was black, of course, and would be perfect for my plan. I watched from afar as guests flooded the venue. It was no surprise that nobody from our family was there. They'd be against the marriage, too. I teared up when I saw my sister. She glowed in her puffy white dress and had a huge smile on her face. She waved at the guests like a princess, but then Arthur put his arm around her waist, and when they kissed, I wanted to scream. I was absolutely disgusted. I waited until dinner was about to be served to enter the venue. As soon as my sister saw me, she clasped her hands over my mouth in surprise and ran towards me, giving me a big hug. "I'm so glad you made it," she said through tears. She looked at my dress, which made her frown. "Some of us are still in mourning," I said. She sat me down at a table with complete strangers as the waiters went around placing food in front of everyone. It was the first proper meal I had had in a long time, so I really pigged out, not minding the looks I was getting from people at my table. Time for toasts finally came, and I was more than ready. I tapped my champagne glass with a knife and stood up. People at all tables turned towards me, and I smiled at Arthur's frown. "Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for being with my little sister on her big day," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I would also like to ask how you felt when you got the invitation. Were you thrilled to attend the wedding of a stepdad and his stepdaughter?" I continued. I could hear gasps all around me, and I saw my sister's mouth fall open. I went on a rant about how my mother had just died and my sister married a widower. They looked at the couple in disgust. People from Arthur's family, whom we had never met, got up from their seats and demanded that he explain what was going on. When I saw that the party was in chaos and the bride was crying, I shouldered my backpack and I walked out. It was late at night and I left the party and was returning to my motel room. I opened the door with my little card, and before I could turn the lights on, I passed out when something hit the back of my head forcefully. When I woke up, I shivered. I recognized the place immediately. It was in the partially charred attic of my mom's beach house. I was tied up to a chair, and since the roof was burnt, I could see a lot of the sky. The sun hadn't risen yet, but it looked like it was just about to. I heard steps, and my sister climbed up, followed by Arthur. She had tears streaming down her face. "You ruined the happiest day of my life. How could you?" she screamed at me. But I was unfazed. "You married our stepdad right after our mom died. How could you?" I screamed back. "It's your fault Mom's dead. She wasn't supposed to be here when it happened." She screamed back at me with a sob. She revealed the truth about the fire. "Arthur and I spilled paint thinners everywhere so we could light the house on fire and elope with the insurance money," she sobbed. It all started coming together in my mind. Arthur always loved my sister because they were together. I told them Mom had gone on a walk, so when she came back the house would have been on fire already, but she was tired because we fought, so she took a nap instead. It was my fault. I should have checked my phone sooner. I realized as tears began streaming down my face. Arthur grabbed Alice's hand and started pulling her towards the ladder to leave. I started kicking and screaming at them to untie me. Arthur stalked over to me and, getting as close to my face as he could, said, "This is the least you deserve, you brat." When I heard the car speed away, I stopped screaming. I began wiggling my arms, legs, and torso until the ropes began to loosen. I was able to untie myself, but all my stuff was gone. I was hours away from the city. I didn't know where to go. I ran down to the beach where the sun was beginning to rise, but found myself so weak that I collapsed crying. My mom was gone, and now so was my sister. I could have prevented this, all of this, if only I had picked up the phone.